Your knowledge of contract language is imperative.
You must know what a violation looks like if you wish to be active in its cessation.
It is important to understand that being active and knowledgeable affects your overall bargaining strength.
Together, we can forge a more militant NALC.
Good morning and welcome back to Parcels of Knowledge, that podcast dedicated to delivering knowledge to the city letter carrier, with your host, the Roseville Wrecking Ball, here to drop the elbow of education today on my day off. Yes, that's right, I got the weekend off. I don't know what grievance number we're on. I think it's 531. It's been jumping pretty high, but pretty soon it's going to be cut off. But I got a treat for you today, just like I told you I would. I have here with me on the other side, I got Eric Chornoby, the host of APWU podcast and a local APWU representative. We are going to do a bit that's going to be pretty cool. I think I want to do this again, but I'll let you listen to it. You tell me what you think of it. I think this was very healthy conversation between the NALC and APWU representatives. And I think that maybe we should do this once a month. What do you guys think? Let me know after you're done listening. But without further ado, I'll meet you on the other side. And here's the interview. All right, I'm on the other side here with Eric Chornoby. Am I saying that right?
Yes, you are.
And he's an APWU representative or steward, or I'm going to get him to introduce himself. We're going to introduce both of ourselves, and we're going to compare and contrast each other's contracts between the APWU and the NALC. Just some interesting conversation between two brothers of different crafts in the Postal Service. And I think today's going to be an interesting one, so stick around. But for the time being, Eric, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I am Eric Chornoby. I'm an officer in the Michigan Postal Workers Union and in the 48041 area local in Metro Detroit as well. I'm the owner and host of APW You with Eric Chornoby, my podcast, and the owner of APWSteward.com, a free resource for stewards and APWU members.
All right, this guy is good. This guy is really good. But if you don't know me already, I'm going to introduce myself as well. And my name is Joshua Shrum. The reason why I'm introducing myself on my own podcast is we're going to cross this episode potentially between both podcasts. So for his listeners, they might not know who I am. So I'm Joshua Shrum. The Roseville Wrecking Ball is what I'm more commonly known as. I'm a NALC steward out of the Roseville, Michigan installation, branch 4374. And, I got a podcast as well. My podcast is uh, Parcels of Knowledge. And I started that in May. And, I got to give it to him. Eric's doing a stand up job, considering he doesn't have a whole lot of APWU to be able to understand how the format should be. But man, he's got some excellent sound quality. But the way today's going to work, we're just going to have a genuine discussion about the comparisons and contrasts of our contract and the way we do things. And we're going to we prepared 4 questions for each other, and they may branch into sub questions, but 4 main questions. And we're going to go back and forth. When we're done with our question, we're going to say, okay, well, I'm done with my question. You go ahead with your next one. And we're going to start with Eric. So, Eric, from the top, what is your first question for the NALC stewards?
My first question is going to be about overtime equalization. So that's something we don't have in the APWU, and it seems like a lot of our clerks want it. Could you kind of walk through what overtime equalization is, and how do you handle legislation tracking quarterly? What's your process?
Well, it's a complicated situation. I definitely have something to say about this topic, and I don't know if it's something you wanted to hear, but personally, I'm not a fan of equalization. I think a pecking order would be more appropriate. I don't know if in the APW, do you have a pecking order of overtime? Does it get distributed by seniority?
Yes, it's a pecking order by seniority and employee classification.
So if you don't know this already, equalization it's a compromise. It's a something that we lost to be able to be more consistent with enforcement. Because back in the day, our third step of the process is called Step E. So back in the day, they were losing their minds at Step E in arbitration because they were like, okay, well, everyone's got different local pecking orders, different rules, different regulations, and they wanted to condense it into one thing that can be applicable across the board. So they tried an Article 8 task force. It's also was started in an effort to reduce Article 8 violations. And at the end of the task force, they decided, okay, well, the best way we're going to do this is moving forward. There is no entitlement to overtime among the ODL. So they removed any sort of question for pecking orders. They said, if you're an ODL next to an ODL, there's no form of entitlement between the two of us. We even lost entitlement to our own routes. You have to be an OWA to get entitlement to your route overtime. An ODL, they can work you 8 hours on your route and take off your overtime. Maybe you have 2 hours of your overtime on your own route. They could take it away from you, give it to someone else, but give you other overtime. So it was a compromise, and so they struck our entitlement away, and they only made the expectation that it is equitably distributed. So it kind of created another uh, tunnel in which every place is different again. So everyone has to be equitable within what their past practice normally entails. For Roseville, that's within 8 hours of the top carrier. And it's a very terrible process because it kind of undercuts the value of your overtime. Because if you're to be within, it's a 2-quarter process. You're to be within 8 hours of the top carrier. So let's say I'm at the bottom, I got -10 from the top carrier. Well, that 8 hour discrepancy gets subtracted from my equitability. So now I start the next quarter -2. So I just got 8 hours taken right off the top. And then let's say I'm -10 again the next quarter. Well, then the second quarter of the process, they failed to make me equal. So they pay me the difference, but oftentimes they'll pay me within 8 again. So that's 16 hours off the top right there. I was really inequitable by 20 hours, but I got paid something around the lines of 2 or 4. So, at the end of the day, I don't like the process. I think it's unfair. Oftentimes they judge equitability by a percentage because maybe an arbitrator says, oh, within eight's not fair. So we're going to do a percentage of the average or something stupid like that. Well, if they did that in my office, everyone will be equitable every quarter. So it's just one of those things where I would prefer a pecking order, to be honest. It's okay. It's better than having nothing. But I think that taking the entitlement away from the ODL among the ODL, there's still entitlement for ODL versus non-ODL, but there's no entitlement ODL versus ODL. So taking that away and taking the local powers from being able to negotiate what works best for them, I don't think it was a good choice. Hopefully, did I
I can't.
answer everything?
You absolutely did. Thank you. It's interesting that first off, it's nothing like most clerks understand or believe it is. I knew it was tracked over a couple quarters, but it's fascinating that it's not even close to actually being equalization. It's kind of it's a ballpark swing here that has
Yeah,
to be a nightmare as a steward to grieve.
absolutely. Well, once you have an established past practice, it becomes very stringent and structured so that technically you can't really lose unless an arbitrator, that management could always, and any grievance, come up with the fact that this is an undue burden the service has to carry. And if they somehow overcome that heavy burden to prove that, well, then an arbitrator could feel bad for them and say, you're right, within 8 is unrealistic. We're going to change the past practice at this place and say that they have to be within the average. So it's a
Mm.
weird place to be.
Sounds like it. Not as much of a benefit as we think in the APWU.
Well, I can tell you what, management, even though they have the benefit, in my opinion, in this situation, they still fail to meet their obligations. So it is a guaranteed payout if your manager is a typical manager. So I mean, we've had $30,000 payouts before. Because, like I said, like all it takes is one guy to be favored over the other. He could be getting 40 hours more than the rest. Well, if we have to be within 8 and we got 22 ODLs, well, then if he's 40 hours from the next guy, then that's a big payout for everybody else.
That's true. I guess that's the best way to look at it.
So, you ready for my question now?
I am.
All right. Can you explain to me your procedure from the local level up each step? Like, for example, we got Formula A. Informal A is our first step, Formal A is our second, then step B, then arbitration. Can you tell me what the names are for yours and what happens prior to an appeal? As if you were breaking it down for a new steward, just so I know whether or not our systems are very similar.
Of course. I'd be happy to dive into that because I believe our systems are similar, just missing names just to make things fun for us. So our process in the APWU is we have 4 steps: step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4. Step 1 is a meeting with the immediate supervisor. Step 2 is a meeting with management's designee. That could be a postmaster or labor relations or a manager. And that's what I like to call in-house. Those first steps are under a month in total from initiating the grievance at step 1 and appealing to step 2. Step 3 is going to be when we cannot settle locally, and that would be either arbitration or an actual step 3 grievance meeting. And then step 4 is going to be a national level dispute.
Oh,
Now, our
wow.
appeal process, if it's also kind of unique how it goes from 3 to 4. And so step 4 is going to be either a national level dispute that our union raises on our behalf, or something can be appealed to step 4 if it's happening in multiple regions at once. The parties would hold the step 3s in advance until it's decided upon in step 4.
Okay, the way you explain it that last part actually I was about to ask a question, but it kind of cleared the air. Basically, you're right. Our steps are very similar. For those of you who listen, NALC has informal A, formal A. Informal A is between the steward and the immediate supervisor. Formal A is between the formal A designee, could be the steward, by default it's the branch president and the postmaster or their designee. And then step 3 is called step B, which is 2 parties, one on each side that were, they call it the DRT, and it's essentially just an extra step, just like Formal A, but outside parties. Typically, that's our biggest hang up because our step Bs are kind of sellouts. I'm not gonna lie, they're more baby splitters than others. It seems like sometimes, and I know arbitration's 50-50, but when your NBA has a funky idea of how they interpret the contract, and I know they're above you, so you can't really do nothing about it, then the step E seems to also possess a funky idea. And if you think you got a good idea and it's different than what the NBA believes, well, it's just not going to survive step E. But then we have arbitration. But at some point during this process, we have the right to elect, not us as stewards, but I do believe the national has the right to say, okay, well, this is an interpretive issue, and we're going to uh, push this issue to a national level interpretive issue. I think that's at step B or higher. And I do know that our union itself has the right to file a national level grievance outside of the prior recognized steps. That's it's almost identical, to be honest. So, all right, that pretty much answered my entire question. So you go ahead with your second one.
Of course. My next question is going to be about no time off suspensions, because that's another difference we have. First, and it's a 2-part question. I'll softball them both to you. I think it goes hand in hand. How do you feel about those no time off suspensions, aka paper suspensions, for the clerks listening? And do you believe it's in conflict with the principles of progressive discipline?
Well, this is my opinion. I don't know if it's in conflict with progressive because we have progressive regardless. I can still recognize that there are a particular step in each. Uh, it goes from letter warning, 7-day, 14-day removal. It's regardless. Nobody can say it's not progressive necessarily, but I do think there's something to consider in this equation, and in this part of the equation at this time of the postal life. I think that you guys have the advantage here. At this very moment, I would prefer that we serve our suspensions in an off-duty status because what you got to really take into account here is the ability for the service to provide relief for that suspension. When we're in times of easy hiring, uh, well, then a working suspension might be preferable because there are a level of degree that benefits the carrier. Of course, for in your case, it'd be clerk, but um, if you work through it, you don't have a penalty of pay, and that protects you from management mishandling the procedure and just punishing you simply to take your pay away as a sign of disrespect. But on the other hand, um, one thing I've noticed is sometimes there's a benefit to making it difficult for a manager to discipline you as a way to make them pick and choose their battles. Because I've noticed that coming from my office alone, I started in 2021, and this may be just a coincidence. Maybe I'm crazy here, but we've always had a rotating door of postmasters. So you can't say it's the postmaster. It was consistently a lot of discipline before I got here. And also, we would do 100 or less grievances per year, and maybe 50 of them were discipline. Now that I've been here, I file close to 400 to 500 a year, many of them contract, and I realize that they don't have time to file discipline anymore. So there is a benefit to making management pick and choose their battles because now we get maybe 10 disciplines a year. So at this point, they're really saying, okay, well, I don't want to give Josh any more union time. I don't have time to meet on all these grievances. And I know discipline takes longer than all the other cases. So I really don't want to write this frivolous discipline up. And that kind of bleeds into the subject at hand, where if you're going to put this person off the clock, you're going to recognize that there needs to be relief for this missing time that you're going to be creating. So it puts management into position that, back in the day when they were able to do frivolous ones because they had the ability to, because they weren't busy, they would go out there and write 20 people up for the same infraction just because they wanted to and they wanted to be jerks about it. Well, if they did that with time off suspensions, well, they'd have a hell of a time justifying the relief of that time off because having 20 people off at once, holy shit, that would be alarming. I would hope that you would have to have the staff for that. So it takes the ability for management to issue frivolous discipline a little bit out of their hands because they kind of have to pick and choose their battles. And maybe you can tell me whether or not that's true on your side of things, but that's just my opinion of the matter.
I like your perspective. I haven't looked at it that way, as a way to dissuade discipline. To be forthcoming, my experience is a little different. My main facility is a call center. We have our own labor relations department. We report directly to headquarters. So it really doesn't matter how many grievances I throw at the wall. When I have 3 people in the office against me, and it's their full-time job, there's not a good way around that. But I do recognize in smaller offices, although the union time is not much of a consideration by management in my experience for the clerk craft, is they can just work our overtime more flexibly to get the job done, as opposed to you have to be on the street. But I absolutely do see that it's a strategy I recommend to overwhelm management in smaller offices to get them to back down. It's a viable strategy we do use.
Yeah, what I did notice, at least with my office for the APW side, Man, they're really because we're so short staffed. We're not a facility like a plant. We're just we got like maybe five APWU clerks, and they're overworked. Where they're understaffed over there. So they really do. They're dissuaded from even bringing them to an interview because they need to get the. We don't even have a steward in office, so they need to get the outside representation in just to do an interview. So over here, you rarely see an APW discipline.
Sometimes it pays to be an employee in a office that they just don't hire properly. But that's going to be the normal now than the exception.
All right, you ready for my question?
Absolutely.
What solutions do you guys have to incentivize compliance to the contract? Is it working where you're from in the APW? And how do you guys go about addressing compliance to settlement agreements?
Of course, that's a good question and a controversial one in the APWU, unfortunately. Our approach as a union has been for the past 60 years, frankly, to just file a grievance. That's the advice we receive. In the last roughly 20 years, we've adopted a strategy overall, which we call the multiple grievance strategy for compliance. And that's going to be a grievance on management not abiding by the settlement, a grievance on management not recognizing the APWU as the bargaining unit representative, and a grievance on a hostile work environment being created by management pitting the union against the member, essentially. Now, that is something that I find a lack of efficacy in recently. Due to our grievance backlog, as we unfortunately do have similar issues with our business agents in some areas, although not necessarily, we don't always disagree with what they do, it's just that we just don't have enough of them for the amount of grievances we file. Our grievance procedure has different arbitration panels at step 3. And when you have a grievance going to one panel, the time difference from these 3 grievances backs us into a corner where the strategy just is not as effective. One part of the strategy just may not be heard for 2 years, while the other is heard in 6 months. It's not as good as it used to be. Now we do have workarounds. Something I advocate for is to bring up compliance issues at district labor management meetings. District managers are the ones who care about the number of grievances being filed in an office. It's a trackable metric they use. Identifying to a district manager and to PUMs that we could wipe 50 cases off of a docket if your postmaster would just settle some of this easy stuff. That does have a lot of value. In our national level in the APW, we do occasionally have periods of enforcement from our industrial relations department, as well as our what we call regional coordinators. They're over each area in the APWU. They also care about our backlog, and when they are looking to crack down on the backlog, they will contact presidents and post in our national magazine that if you have a compliance issue, let us know. And with our counterparts in the Postal Service at the national level, we can make a lot of these repetitious issues go away. So that is all predicated on the local structure's president being active and aware in what's happening.
Do you guys have relative success with escalating remedies in terms of incentivizing compliance?
That is region specific.
Okay.
Some areas we get it, we find an advantage to it. Other areas we don't.
Yeah, right now we're dealing with our national union is a complete opposite opinion as many rank and file. Right now, we have had relative success with escalating remedies in most areas, but our national union is kneecapping us because they're saying that they're agreeing with management. They're saying we must have weaponized it, and unfortunately, that's a very bad position for them to take because it's not helping us in any way whatsoever. It'd be different if we had other solutions. Like, for example, if a manager, like if they're violating the JSOV, oftentimes we can potentially get them removed depending on, or at least removed from supervising us depending on the situation. But in terms of compliance, if we had any alternative solutions, like for example, removing a manager for refusing to comply, then that would be reasonable to say that, maybe we shouldn't get escalation via money, but we don't. And I've seen relative success. It's not like it's not working. Some places it might not be, but in a lot of places it may be. So it's ridiculous. But hey, it looks like we're kind of going a little bit over. So I'm going to give you the next question. I'm going to change up the structure too, because I'll give you the next question, and then I'll do both my last ones because I think your last question is probably the coolest. So I'm going to save yours for last. So
Okay,
you go ahead with your third question.
absolutely. So, little context here. I started quite a bit before you did, and I was around before CCAs were a thing. And one of my most vivid memories when I was a PSE at the time was the transition from TEs to CCAs. The TEs had a lot of complaints that I had many friends who quit due to the lack of compensation, the severe drop. How do you feel about the switch from TEs to CCAs
Well, from what I
and
was
the two
told,
different?
I think it was dramatically, overwhelmingly negative, and I agree that it was probably the worst thing that ever happened to us because it was a step back. There's a lot of controversy on the subject. I know there's a camp within our union led by an individual named David Noble who used to work at the National, who is in the opinion that this was uh, compromised by the National at the time. They had, I guess, submitted a proposal for it. And I don't know if that's true or not, but all I know is that it was a massive upset. And it was one of the only times in our known history, for all I know, that we had to take a step back in wage progression. I heard people lost, $10 an hour or something ridiculous like that. And, it was a step in the right direction, a small step in terms of pathway from non-career to career, because eventually we got it in that it took 2 years to become career now as a CCA, and in the past, prior to the CCA position, we did have like decades sometimes of people being in a non-career status. That's the only one benefit that came out of the transaction, and I don't think it was default. I think it came the next contract. But regardless, it was a terrible, terrible time for us, and we still have scars from it. I know there's a lot of carriers that talk about how they would have left, how many people have left, and for the ones that stuck around, they're still mad about it. So they might not be as mad as the day it happened, but it's not. It was a terrible thing. Am I set to go with mine, or did I answer everything you needed?
You did, thank you.
So my third question is going to be, and I don't know if this is even true, so I'm going to ask you. And then if it is true, we'll talk about it. But so I've been filing out of schedule premium for 204Bs. And I started off because, there was an arbitrator for past practice that had determined at a national level grievance, something that stuck with me for a long time. He said, something that is something that is fo- uh, something that's followed as much as it is not followed loses its weight in arbitration. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but um, he was talking about how if you have something, you should be consistent with it, and that's what I do with my grievances. And I was kind of conflicted. Most places in the NALC do not file for 204Bs to get out of schedule premium, but as far as I know, it goes with my principles that I have to be clear and consistent with contract enforcement, because otherwise I'm giving management an argument to say, hey, all these times it's okay, you didn't file, but now you're filing because it doesn't involve a 204B. We can't pick and choose when to enforce the contract, and I think you agree with that opinion. But from what I understand from a local APW guy, and this is not from the Detroit local, it's not from my local, there was someone else I was talking to. He claimed that you guys no longer enforce an opinion that 204Bs are subject to out of schedule premium, which I think is crazy because we cite the APWU when we were sister unions. We cite the remedy you guys have created. When we go to NALC stuff, the only thing that we can cite is from the APWU. So I think that would be insane. But is that true? Do you guys think that 204Bs are not entitled to out of schedule premium anymore?
Well, the answer is yes, and the explanation I can give you a very quick one or a slightly longer answer. Which would you like to hear?
I'll take the quick one and I'll branch off if I need to know a little bit more specifics.
Sure, it's actually negotiating our contract. The quote is employees detailed on bargaining positions are not entitled to out of schedule premium, and that's in Article 37.3A of the APW CBA.
Okay, that's mind-boggling because you guys are the reason why we do it. So like it's really funny because you guys had this settlement from probably 1980 and it was in New York and I guess for a 3-year period they had given them out of schedule premium based on their bid. And that's what we use. We use that language like, look, 1723s, they're not bids. Your bid is what determines your schedule. So if the bid is that you work 8 to 4:30, it doesn't matter. You have the right to schedule that 204B 8 to 4:30, and if you don't, that's just the price to pay because that's what every carrier gets if they're worked outside their schedule. As long as it's applicable to out of schedule premium, because I know it's very slim the margins in which you apply that. So that's interesting. Yeah, it's a
It
very
is.
interesting thing.
The it kind of sprung from at least my understanding of the national level negotiations is the APW has made a push in the last roughly 20 years to discourage the use of 204Bs as much as possible and utilize lead clerks. And this is just another element of that overall strategy, from what I've been told. Because I agree with you, the contract's a contract. We are the enforcers of the contract. Why harm a member? But the theory here is that 204Bs can only be used in very specific circumstances in the clerk craft, and that if at all possible, a lead clerk should be utilized in place of a 204B.
It makes a lot of sense, to be honest. We don't have an equivalent of lead clerks. But okay, we'll go on to the last and final questions for each of us. I'll start first because both of our questions are sort of related, but I think his is a lot better. But I'll go first. Do you think the fact that we split as sister unions back in the day helped or hurt the APWU?
It overwhelmingly hurt both sides. I have
Okay.
spoken to. Go ahead.
No, I get that. It makes sense. To be honest, just my opinion, and I'll let you move forward. A lot of people in the NALC have the opinion that it helped us in terms of our pay at the time of the split because we made the argument that we deserve more because we work outside. But at this point in time, I would have to say that I agree. At this very time, it hurts us more than it helps us. But at the very time that that happened, I don't think it would have happened had we continued. We wouldn't have gotten the pay bump had we continued negotiating together. But is that really worth it in the end? Now our pay is pretty much the same. So. But yeah, go ahead and continue. Sorry to interject.
Oh no, perfectly fine. You actually touched one of my points. That was one of the upsides. But having spoken to people who were actually at the bargaining table at the time, it was really just a split in interest, and you kind of hit the nail on the head. For carriers at the time, the NALC, we just had different priorities. Carriers at the time were the face of the company. It was a more respected job, and we didn't have the same problems. When's the last time you saw a supervisor willingly go and field the carrier around? It doesn't happen. But in the APWU, you have management willingly doing our work all the time. That just created interest. And unfortunately, we touched on this earlier, I believe we have far more favorable overtime rules in the APWU that leads to more pay overall. Whereas for the NALC, the issue at the time really wasn't management doing our work or overtime, is you could only be out delivering in a specific window. Would the pay scale be as high today for the NALC if we were still together? I
I'm
think
not
the answer to
sure.
that theoretically no.
Okay. Yeah, it's very possible. I have no understanding of whether or not it would be, but that's a good point. I don't think it would have played too much into it, but you're probably right. We wouldn't have got that initial bump, so we would have been at a lower starting point for negotiation.
But we would have overall, with the solidarity, it's a big difference in the 90s when together easily over hundreds of thousands of members more than we have today,
Oh,
and
for
the
sure.
ability to stop the country if we all had to strike, because there were a couple wildcat attempts in the APWU over the years. I think we would be in a far more advantageous place if we went to the table together.
All right, that leads us into our last and final question before we let Eric get to work. I got a weekend today, so I got the advantage here, but I'm off Friday, Saturday, Sunday, so he has to go to work like pretty much right after this. But all right, Eric, what is your final question?
My final question feeds right off of yours. One thing that's always bothered me is our lack of solidarity between our unions since the split in the 90s when we joint negotiated. I know in facilities I represent, we try to work together, the unions. How do you feel about our unions working together in the grievance procedure and overall? And do you work with the APWU?
Well, so I'm going to answer this with my personal story, and forgive me, Detroit. I think that's the local we are a part of. Forgive me if I get any of these things wrong or put you in any bad light because I have nothing but respect for those guys. So don't take this any of the wrong way. But I think I have a more vested interest in working jointly than either than APW even does. And they have an interest. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they don't. But here's my personal experience with that. At Roseville, when I came in, we were a mess. And I think it was partially because of COVID. But the NALC stewards were ready to retire from doing steward work. They were just there every once in a while if they had to. They weren't invested, and they were just kind of secondarily being a steward and only for what they had to file. And then when I came in, I got lucky enough that I can go right in. I was a steward for 10 years prior to this job, so it was good for me to not have to wait my turn, I guess. But what I noticed was APW also didn't have a steward. And over time, I tried to learn, certain things for the APW. And I thought this whole time we really should be working together. We have an office at Roseville, a joint office where APW has property. And we have three desks in that office. One of the desks is APW. One of them's the timekeeper's desk, but they don't use it anymore. So I have been the only one in that office since I've been there, and I use all three desks like a selfish person, but because APW doesn't use it, so I just got my stuff strewn upon everywhere. I'm like that guy with the red yarn, and I got all my stuff everywhere, and I'm just trying to put the picture together for everything. So I'm we're using
I
all
feel
three
that.
desks. Yeah. So like that's beside the point, but essentially I thought, okay, well there's a void here, and I'm not self-serving. So this was when a different administration was over the Detroit APW, but I reached out to him. I said, look, I have interest in dual certification because I think that you guys are not being properly represented here. So either, maybe I can serve in a secondary role to try and give you guys information about violations, or if you're willing to, you can dual certify me, and I don't expect any type of salary. I don't know how it works there, but I don't want it anyway. If there is a salary or some sort of weird stipend, I just want to help in any way I can on both sides. So I was just gave them my dual certification interests, and of course, they had no interest in doing so. the new administration took over, I still put that interest out there. I don't think they're going to take it. Of course not, because why would you if you come in and do it yourself? But what I did notice was the new guys, they are a little bit more interested in definitely coming in and taking care of business, and I think they have been. It's wrong for me to say that because I'm not APWU, so I can't define what taking care of business was. But from what I can tell, they're doing more than the last guys. And I have been jointly working with them because, for example, I noticed that management does your guys' job every single day. And so does my clerks. So we have joint interest there because that's Article 7 for us. That's crossing crafts. And then it would lead to other violations, like if the clerk's coming in at 6 a.m. to help, no, not clerk, I'm sorry, my CCAs. If the CCA's coming in at 7 a.m. or 6 a.m., well, then they're going over 11 and a half and violating their limitations, or maybe they could have been used for avoiding mandation, but instead they're mandating 8-hour carriers instead of because they had these CCAs doing clerk work and they hit their limitations. So there's a lot of issues that come out of that. So I filed a grievance. I went back a whole year and I said, look, here's all the cross-reference points, and I think that the lack of clerk staff on the APW side is violating the NALC agreement in many different ways. Like, for example, I referenced, okay, look at during this time period, I didn't get my steward time. And I needed 14 more hours, and I did it off the clock and filed for a violation to get paid. But during this time period, there may have been 30 hours of CCAs doing clerk work, or I cross-reference every time there was mandation. It could have been avoided by CCAs doing carrier work instead of clerk work, or anytime there was limitations violated as a result of that could have been avoided by using the CCAs for what they're supposed to be doing. And so I documented it every day with my calendar and evidence, and I filed grievances to make them switch the CCAs into the clerk craft because they weren't doing that timekeeping wise either. So I took all that documentation and I gave them that documentation to APW. I said, look, you guys can use any and all this information to file your own grievances because it's all cross-referenced and put together. And now you have from January to July. At the time I filed this, it was July. From January to July, you have a time frame of exactly who worked where, and I've helped them fix the clock range, so now everything's accurate. So I think it's important that we do things like that. We need to work together because many of our problems are joint problems that have stemming issues that if we got one side resolved, it could be better for the entire office. That's just my opinion. I think that's very important that we work together for sure.
I appreciate the answer, and I just want to comment. Been bringing across the country for the APWU, and what you're doing is textbook what I recommend. Hitting the service from both sides when we have issues through the similarity in our language, and that solidarity inside and outside the grievance procedure is how we beat management. It's together. You're doing an incredible job from what you just said.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Yeah, anything I can do to help because I got the clerks coming to me all the time, like, "Hey, can they do this? Can they do that?" And I'll just say, "Hey, you got to talk to your actually your dad is one of the guys that Pat Charnaby. He's one of the good guys. I recommend him. He's really cool. But they're all cool, especially the new administration. And I think like you said, you touched it, you hit it right on the head. We need to work together. Now, if you don't mind, if people like this episode, by the way, comment if you like it, or let me know one way or another. If this is a series that could be started in the future, who knows? Maybe we could do this once a month, APW and NALC working together. What do you think of that?
I would love it. To be frank, your podcast was part of my inspiration for doing this.
Oh, thank
I'd
you.
be happy to do more of this.
That makes me feel good about that, man. Man, your podcast though, it's out of this world. It's 100% what I intended to be, and I became a little bit more political than I wanted to be. I wanted to keep it strictly educational, but either way, yours sounds like even without considering the topics, yours is just 100% even more professional. I love what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing, and it was good to have you on, Eric. Anything else you'd like to say before we go?
And I think that is all I need to add. I just want to say thank you for the episode doing this with me, and I would love to do it again.
Awesome. You have a good day, Eric.
You too.
All right. So, what did you guys think about that? Do you think we should do this on a regular basis? Maybe we should let listeners submit questions on each side for us to ask each other and talk about. I think this is something that could be a reoccurring thing for sure, but please feel free to give me your commentary about whether or not this is something that's necessary or interesting to you. Now, I'm going to leave you for the day. I'm going to go have a good weekend. So hopefully you guys do as well. And hopefully you learned something valuable today. As always, have a good day.
Out to the Roseville Wrecking Ball. He is an Article 8 scholar, and thank God. We need Article 8 scholars right now. The Grievous Genius and the Roseville Wrecking Ball doing amazing work.
Brothers and sisters, this guy is good, man. He's fucking good.
And my boy Joshua, he killed it. Man, he's lockstep right now. He's killing it.
You would think this guy has been around for 30 fucking years. That's how good he is.